Video. Absolutely, because the session will be recorded, and if you don't want to be recorded, well, obviously turn your video off, and we'll be saying to everyone, certainly during the first part of the meeting, please put yourself on mute so that we don't get too many disruptions uh, with those who are speaking. We're going to be looking at what health and social care workers can and should be doing about climate change and the need to try and promote sustainability. I think we've got three very good reasons for getting health and social care workers involved. We see what happens to real people as a result of climate change. And as I hope by the end of this session, you'll be perhaps rather more aware of what you should be looking out for and realize that some of the start is in climate change. Healthcare workers are heavily involved in damaging the environment. If you look at the amount of PPE we've just been using, if you look at the anesthetic gases we release, if we look at the amount of mileage and what happens with their carbon footprint, all sorts of good reasons to say some of the damage is coming from us. What can we do to reduce it? And crucially, or importantly, healthcare workers do have a credible voice with our patients and with others we're working for, and maybe with politicians, that the healthcare voice and the social care voice is important. It does matter. And I hope by the end of this meeting, we're all rather more aware of what we can be doing. But you don't want to hear from me. There's some really good speakers. I'm glad that most of them have already joined the meeting. We'll ask you if you've got questions that you want to be picked up and answered in the discussion session towards the end, please put it into the chat, but start what you're putting into the chat with a Q, which means the people who are going through the chat will spot it's a Q, this is a question, it's one of those that we should be bringing forward. So with that, I'll say welcome, and we'll ask Matt Sawyer, a GP and sustainability consultant, to talk to us about the impacts on Yorkshire Yorkshire health from the climate crisis. So over to Matt.
Hi, thank you all very much for being here on what certainly here in Yorkshire is a beautiful evening. So I'm Matt Sawyer, I'm a GP. I live in Bedale, which is north part of North Yorkshire, part of Hambleton. I've been a GP for over 15 years now, but I also care deeply for planetary health as well as human health. So I went off and did a BSc and then an MSc in environmental studies. And my real passion and drive is trying to find ways to help primary care particularly reach carbon net zero as part of the overall NHS green plan or greener NHS plan. So really, I'm going to have a few minutes just talking about what the impact is on Yorkshire, on me as an individual, my family, my patients, my staff, and what the expected impacts are going to be in the future, but also what's happening right now. So the impacts of climate change are really quite well known in terms of the driving science, the driving mechanisms behind it. We know that we are releasing greenhouse gases, of which carbon dioxide is one of them. And these rising carbon dioxide levels are causing rising temperatures through the greenhouse gas effect, where we insulate the Earth ever better and temperatures start to rise. These rising temperatures and global heating contribute to more extreme weather patterns, and this combined with sea ice loss causes sea level rise. And this is something which people may have already seen in the past of what are the impacts from the climate crisis, from climate change on human health, and really as a result of these driving mechanisms. So I'll come on to what the impacts on Yorkshire are, but we've got all sorts of different things, whether it be changing food availability, leading to malnutrition, changing water availability, either too much water in places and flooding, or not enough water in other places and droughts, change to infectious disease patterns, the change of pathology when it comes to heat, looking at cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease. So there's actually quite a lot of direct and indirect impacts on health. But what does this mean for Yorkshire? This isn't about polar bears or people elsewhere. It's about what's happening to us and here. So sea level rise. This is a map of the southern part of Yorkshire and the Humber. And these are the annual projected flood levels in 30 years. So this is anything that's in red is going to be affected, or is expected to be affected, by rising sea level. So this is water coming up rather than from rainfall. And we'll have a look at some of the mental health burdens of flooding. But when we start looking at the area that's going to be affected, we're going to have refugees from Hull moving, and from the Humber region moving to elsewhere. So this isn't just about sort of human displacement elsewhere in the globe. This is on our doorsteps. We know that there are a lot of physical health impacts from sea level rise. We know that the mental health ones, and the anxiety and depression that goes with it. We know that there are financial burdens. We know that trying to pay to clean up the house this time, or afford insurance for next time, only adds to more financial stress for people. And this really starts to highlight some of the inequalities. If you live in one of these areas that's going to be affected by sea level rise, and you can afford to move, then I suspect that you will move. Or if you can afford to put in flood defences, you will put in flood defences. And of course, it's those who can't afford to do these things or can't afford to move away who are going to be affected most. So those who are already unequal in society are actually going to be made more so by the effects of the climate crisis here in Yorkshire. So that's water coming up from the sea. We've also got rainfall and extremes in weather patterns. And for each of the towns that we live in, there's a river, there are storm and surface water flooding maps available, so that we can see what the extent of damage is expected to be in for us and for our patients. So this is Stokesley, for example, and we can start to see the different areas that will be affected. And if people want more details for their own personal location, I can certainly point people in the direction of where to find this. So I live in Bedale, which is Hambleton, and just up from Hambleton are is Wensleydale and Swaledale and Arkindale, and this is a couple of years ago. This is 2019. So this is July 2019. So this is the the height of summer 2 years ago. And these are some of the comments that people had when they were flooded out of their homes. Now, I don't know if people remember these floods. One of the reasons that I remember it is because I actually got married up at Reeth, which is up in the Dales. And I won't show you wedding photos now, but it is beautiful. And so when I start seeing these are the comments from the people who were around when I got married, it really just starts to bring home that, I don't think I'll ever get over it. My anxieties have been rekindled every time there has been a storm. Now, in Yorkshire, if you've got anxiety every time it rains, that is a lot of anxiety. I know it's even worse in the northwest, but here in Yorkshire, it rains. So knowing that, the event has left them in shock and the flood swept away all of their possessions. People who have lost everything. So these are not just, one-off events that are going to cause some short-term damage, but these are going to last a lifetime. So we as health and social care professionals are going to have to be aware that we're going to have to help pick up some of these pieces. Rising temperatures, and so here I am on one of the hottest days. I think it's the hottest day of the year so far, saying that actually rising temperatures could be a problem. And so this was a study from not so long back, saying that the Leeds climate could be like Melbourne's in 2050. Sounds lovely. last week, and I know Alexis used this in her presentation. I promise I didn't steal it. I'd already was going to use it, that there is about to be a 16-day heat wave for Huddersfield, Sheffield and Leeds later on this month, where the temperatures are not going to get less than 20 degrees. These sound absolutely lovely until you start realizing some of the impacts that heat can cause. So one, for example, is looking at average seasonal temperature rises. So this is over the summer, we expect the temperature to be up by a couple of degrees. And certainly Leeds looks like it might be 5 or 6 degrees because it's a built-up urban area. But this doesn't really explain some of the extremes. So actually, on a hot day in Leeds, the temperature might be up 8, 10, 12 degrees above the average. Last year, for example, in August, there was a heat wave. Back end of August, 1,700 people died as a result of it. We also know that there are other effects. We know that as temperature rises, more people attend casualty. We know that there's a higher crime rate, particularly with violent crime. We know that the odds of dying from strokes and respiratory diseases increase by 10% for every single centigrade rise. And this is from today's paper. This is from 4 hours ago, that the head of health advice for Asthma UK have started putting out warnings saying that it's the combination not only of the hot weather, but it's also the high pollen levels. One of the things that we know with the climate crisis is that seasons where there's going to be more pollen in the air are going to be lasting longer. We know that there are effects from air pollution. For example, long-term exposure to NO2 causes not only problems with lung function in children, but it also causes worsening educational attainment. We know that middle-aged white men get more dementia because of air pollution than any other part of society. So when our counsellors, who tend to be middle-aged white men, say this doesn't affect me, actually yes it does, and you are at greater risk than the majority. But actually, what does it mean locally? So this is Scarborough, for example, and this is the degrees of air pollution. And you can see that there are hotspots actually within Scarborough itself. Now this is down to 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre areas, but this is actually Leeds, and we can actually get street level data in Leeds today, this afternoon, right now, of what the air quality is like and how good or bad it is. And again, I can, if people want to know, I can show them where to find this sort of information. The street level information isn't available for all towns and cities. There's only certain cities in the UK that that's available for. So why do we need to do something about this? Well, there is a prize at the end of us taking combined action. So if we met our current commitment, not going above and beyond what we've already said we're going to do as a nation, we could reduce the amount of deaths by about 125,000. This is huge. So there is a huge gain that we have got in terms of human and public health. And what's good for the human health actually can be good for planetary health as well. So the question then is how? How can you and I do something about this? Well, there's 4 things that I would suggest. The first is to become carbon literate. So become aware. And the Carbon Literacy Project is a national charity that does exactly that. It helps to educate and show how to turn intention into action. And I can give you their website in a moment. The second is know your number. Actually, if we measure our own carbon footprints, whether it be as individuals or whether it be as a practice or as a social services department or a local authority, actually, once we know what our number is, we can then make a plan. We can actually do something to try and decarbonise it. We know what the hotspots are, and we can actually put some action into place. And then finally, we can declare a climate emergency. And there's a variety of places that have got a lot of information, Health Declares being the obvious one, who've got information about what that means and how to do it. We can also, through being local leaders, being through local health and social care staff, actually become advocates for improving our response to the climate crisis. So first of all, it's recognising that we in health and social care work within a wider societal bubble, and that actually survives only because we've got good planetary health. If we lose planetary health, we lose everything that's inside it. So becoming knowledgeable, raising awareness with others, becoming a supporter. So if you see people doing good things, tell them that, show them that you're supportive of it. Take actions yourself and actually both be a follower and create followers as you go. So my take home for today is to do 3 things. Firstly, to explore carbon literacy, and there's the website carbonliteracy.com, and they have got a lot of really useful resources. The second is understand a bit more about carbon footprinting, and there is a link there to how you can do it from a business point of view, from a practice point of view. And the third is look at how to declare a climate emergency. I can put those links up in the chat if that would be useful. And thank you very much. That's 9 minutes, which is one shy of my 10, which is good. I haven't been looking at the chat, but if there's any questions, I'll answer them at the end. Thank you very much.
Matt, there was one question about the lives saved, the potential lives saved. Were they annual figures?
Yep, it's deaths prevented, and yes, 125,000 if we met our current commitments. If we put health and health gains at the heart of climate policies, it's closer to 150,000 per year in the UK only. There's the same for similar data for other parts of the world as well. So it's not just a UK would benefit, but absolutely, yeah.
Well, can I say thanks very much, Matt? That's a very good start. I think you'll have stimulated a lot of thinking, and we're now delighted to go on to, you've already referred to Alexis Percival, so I'm delighted she's here. She's got a lot of experience working with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service, and I think she's going to tell us something about the whole organisation, how we're going to fix it. So Alexis, can I pass you over for some of your wisdom, please?
Absolutely. Right. I do apologise. My computer decided to change over to Office 365, so I might stumble around a little bit. So just bear with me a second whilst I beat my computer up. So fingers crossed, get it to work. That's not what I wanted to show you. There we go. Right. Have we got a full screen? Yes. Perfect. Brilliant. Okay. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let me go back again. I'm Alexis Percival. I'm the Environmental and Sustainability Manager with Yorkshire Ambulance Service, and I'm also the Net Zero Lead for the newly formed Humber Coast and Vale ICS. So all the ICSs around the UK are in the process at the moment of looking to invigorate all of the things that are set to be in place as part of the greener NHS agenda. So climate change, as Matt alluded to and kind of covered, I sat down with a group of different clinicians around the UK, and we looked at what exactly the pressures on the health service would be. And we already are experiencing most of these issues and most of these challenges. So we have increased rainfall, which I'm sure many parts of the UK have experienced this year, and those have led to flash floods, surface water flooding, but also they've led to storms, high winds. And now we're as Matt was saying, we're just about to hit the heat as part of our year, and those will lead to drought. And also we've got the ever likely and already baked in, as to quote Mr. Van Tam, challenges of sea level rise as well. So all of these have a knock-on effect on the health system, and as we experienced 2 years ago with the energy security aspect, we're likely to suffer brownouts, as many of our infrastructure is affected by high winds and storms, but also an overload of people wanting air conditioning and the other elements of drought and water and various other things. These can lead to mental health problems, injuries, infections, hypothermia, and contamination of floodwaters essentially could also lead to waterborne diseases that we're not used to experiencing, like cholera, but also can lead in the longer term to an increase in vector-carrying insects like malaria. And we are also set to have problems that will hit us with things like an increase in cancer, increase in ozone, which also can lead to things like antenatal complications, and things like Zika virus could also become more commonplace as well. But we've also got other things that are a bit more of a global issue, besides heart attacks and COPD, like malnutrition and migration and immigration. And as Matt was saying, we're set in various parts of the UK to have sea level changes that will actually look to move many, many millions of people across the UK. So how do we look to move to get to a greener NHS? And we need to transition fairly rapidly. So the Greener NHS agenda was laid out in October, on the 1st of October last year, and we've been set a target as an organisation, and this is a really critical part. We've spent the past 10, 15 years talking about what our carbon footprint actually is, and now we need to do it. So a scope 1, scope 2 emissions is everything that we buy, everything we procure within and use within our services. And then the scope 3 is the carbon footprint plus. So it's business services, food, catering, various things. So the carbon footprint for the NHS has been set to be decarbonised by 2040. That gives us 19 years to get it right. And then 2045, we need to be cracking on and getting all of our supply chain down to net zero as well. So we have a big challenge ahead of us, because the challenge is, it's not one, let's go to the estates team, let's go to the fleet team. We essentially need to be looking to decarbonise everything. And pharmaceuticals and medicines play about 25% of our carbon emissions. So, but it's not just pharmaceuticals. We've also got things like anaesthetic gases, metered-dose inhalers, everything we procure in our supply chain. But also, we drag patients into hospitals. Could we look at different models of care and ICT to kind of help change the system? So all of these different things are different people's responsibilities. And this is where we need to start part of an engagement programme. Each organisation within the NHS, as one of the third largest organisation, public sector organisation on the planet, behind the Chinese and the American military, we have a massive responsibility. And healthcare across the planet has about 4% of the carbon emissions and would be the fifth largest organisation, the fifth largest country's emissions if we were to actually compute that. So essentially, we have a massive responsibility. And each organisation is broken down to different areas. So GP could be responsible for looking at pharmaceuticals, inhalers and metered-dose inhalers, whereas a dentist is smaller footprint, but it's about dragging people into their surgeries. If you're looking at the larger acutes, theirs is more towards medical instruments and looking at the construction of the buildings. So each organisation has a different way that they can tackle carbon emissions. So the really critical part of how you green an organisation, it starts with education. And as Matt was saying, carbon literacy is a really critical part, because I think most people think, well, the carbon footprint is something to do with the estates team. It's not. It's about all of us playing our role. And, we can start to demand stuff. And if we work through having tribes of green champions within our organisations, there's many different parts of hospitals now that have green emergency departments, have green hospitals, have green surgeons. So there's a rise up of different people within different parts of the organisation are starting to push things forwards and looking at behaviour change and how we collaborate with other organisations, different trusts, from GPs upwards. We all need to have a role to play in this. But we also need to work with the industry that's supplying in and say, right, okay, we want you to innovate. We want you to come up with the ideas, because I want this to be net zero. I want this to be zero carbon emissions. I want this to be manufactured in the UK. You come up with the problem, there will be a solution out there. And we need to challenge each other within that system too. So greening our organisation starts with simple things. So I'm going to give you a bit of an example. Identifying a problem. This particular situation, I'm sure you will all be very familiar with, is a face mask, for example. So we need to consult with our stakeholders. We need to come up with the ideas and the solutions. We need to kind of look at innovation. We need to implement it, and then we need to test it, and then we need to finance it, and then we need to roll it out. But then we also need to show it off to everybody else and say, look what we've done. We've challenged it and we've changed the system. So my particular situation started last August with looking at face masks, and I've got some of my wonderful champions from across the region, including Romina and Matt, who've been testing and trialing all of these. And each system has come up with many different challenges. It isn't a simple, I want to come up with a reusable face mask and then kind of looking at how we get it through there. There are so many different stakeholders as part of this. And if you want to make the change, you need to process it through everybody, because there will always be somebody who creates a blockage. And infection prevention control are a really critical part of this, as well as health and safety teams, but also the users as well. So if you take a simple problem like a 3.5 gram face mask and work out how to change it over to a reusable that essentially could be reused back into some other kind of clothing, there are so many different challenges on the route to get to there, including changing the Department of Health and Social Care and the IPC's viewpoint and stuff. But in order to do that, we need a system change. So there's things like the NHS standard contract that's in place, and this year it will be revolutionised and will change the way that every single part of the NHS operates. So the greener NHS agenda is fully embedded in that, and it will come out next year that we have to report in various different strategies and various different ways that we're looking to decarbonise. We also need to look at board buy-in and having a net zero lead. So every organisation in the NHS now needs to have one. In GPs are a slightly grey area at the moment.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Could you please repeat what you said?
Sorry, Siri's talking to me. And then we need to also work with the greener NHS targets, and they will become more and more stringent. So we need to be looking at an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2032. So that's less than 10 years away. We also need to start mandating green technology from the word go. So when you go out to a tender, when you're looking to procure something, it needs to be as green as possible from that point forwards. But we need to look at how we can change our models of care as well. But there's a really big challenge. 60% of our carbon emissions comes from our supply chain. We need to start engaging with them as soon as possible to actually look at that. But the ripple effects are enormous, because at the moment we procure stuff from halfway across the world, and there's a massive carbon footprint attached to that. But also there's a benefit to looking at what we can do to help those countries and those companies green as well, because they supply to everybody else around the world. So I'll leave you to have a read through all of these at your leisure, but basically these are already laid down in legislation, they're laid down in our contracts, they're laid down in various pledges and guidance that we have. So the NHS is bound by many of these different challenges already. We need to be looking at having a renewable contract for our electricity in place as of last year, April last year. We need to make sure that we look at green and grey fleet reviews to look at what we need to do for our fleet. But we also need to look at what we do to reduce the impact of meter-dose inhalers, look at our infrastructure, work with adaptation planning, and that's quite critical in the Humber region and also the Norfolk region, because they are going to be very badly hit by rising sea levels. But also we need to look at what we can do for rainfall as well in the meantime. So there's lots of different elements that we need to actually have in place as we're already mandated, but we can go further. We can do this a lot faster. So for me, working within the ambulance service, we've got a real challenge. We have, by 2030, we need to phase out diesel, and that we will not be able to buy a diesel vehicle. Problem. Okay, so what are the solutions? We could move over to electric. There are a lot of challenges. We don't have enough infrastructure that's fast enough, and we don't have ambulance stations that could do that. Or we can look at hydrogen electric. The hydrogen electric will be launched at COP26, and we were instrumental in getting the funding and the process to get this in place. So this is part of our challenge, is looking at what we need to do. And you could apply this to anything within any organisation. It's not a simple solution for looking at moving over to electric vehicles as a starting point, and this is quite a critical part of the process mapping in my strange brain, that you need to look at everything So you need to look at all the challenges you face and then work out the solutions and problems to it. This is actually going to have to go to government in order to fund it, because we have 937 ambulance stations around the UK. But by looking at things collaboratively, you can actually see how much we can start to challenge things. Hydrogen will play a role, not just in vehicles, but also will play a role in our kind of decarbonising of the heat going forwards as well. And within the Humber area and across the whole of Yorkshire, we are very well placed because of the offshore wind potential that we can look at as well. So part of the solution for looking at decarbonising an organisation is looking at your estate. And these are the beautiful ambulance stations that we have in Yorkshire, which need drastically upgrading. So essentially, this is what my vision of a future ambulance station would look like. Not too dissimilar to how it is, but with a lot of renewables. We have storage, we have looking at having a renewable energy that can supply and be stored with hydrogen, but also looking at how we can store water and have grey water systems. You could take this as a blueprint and put a GP surgery or an acute hospital on it. This is what we need to be looking at, is localized smart grids in order to accommodate our energy supply and look at all the things that we do within our building and our constructions. And this is one of the major challenges we have, because we need to look at how we engage everybody across the entire system and the entire NHS, but also our supply chain, which we have over 1.5 million people in the NHS, 3 million in total for the whole social care system, but our supply chain is enormous and runs across the entire planet. So we have a big challenge ahead of us, and each one of us needs to challenge the system and change it all. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Alexis. That was really good, and I look forward to hearing a lot more about our green champions in future. So thanks very much. We'll now move on, saying thanks very much, and I hope you'll be around for the questions. Now I'm delighted that we've got Chris, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Foron from Galba, the action group for action on Leeds and Bradford Airport. So thanks very much for coming along, and I hand over to you. You're muted, Chris.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I had hoped, to be frank, that one of the luminaries of Galba, Alistair Cameron, who was himself, he's a retired doctor and was an environmental health expert. And we were very much hoping that he would be able to attend tonight. But so I'm afraid that I'm the second choice and a poor substitute. I've been asked to talk about the work of Galba, the Group for Action on Leeds Bradford Airport. And I probably won't take 10 minutes, probably more like 5. Galba was formed in autumn of 2019 in response to an application by the owners of Leeds Bradford Airport to expand, to build a new passenger terminal. And much has been made in their literature and their propaganda about how green and carbon neutral this passenger terminal building is going to be. And we don't doubt any of that. What we have a beef with is the purposes for which this terminal is going to be constructed. And at the outset, the airport was quite explicit in saying that they needed to have a new terminal building as well as an extra 90 minutes flying time every day in order to facilitate an expansion in passenger numbers. At the moment, pre-COVID, they were transporting about 4 million passengers every year, mostly to holiday destinations in Southern Europe. There were some business flights, but it's chiefly, and always has chiefly been, a holiday airport. So they want to go from 4 million a year to 7 million a year. And the opposition came basically from two groups of interested people. There were those who lived near to it and right under the flight path, who objected from a noise standpoint, and there were others who objected from much further afield, in fact all over Britain, who were objecting on a climate change basis. I happen to have a foot in both camps because I live almost under the flight path, but I'm also extremely worried about climate change and emissions. I'm sorry to say I can't tell you much about the medical effects of things like additional noise. At the moment, the airport has to shut at 11 o'clock at night and can't fly after that except in emergencies. And they want an extra half hour at night and an extra hour in the early morning. Clearly, there will be some serious implications in relation to sleep deprivation. There will also be implications in relation to the stress of living under an airport flight path. And there will be some ramifications in terms of local air quality from the aircraft themselves. But the chief problem with air quality is because once they're up in the air, the particulates and so on are distributed over a very large area. It's not like a major road where you have a canyon effect, which I'm sure members of Medact know more about than I do. But the principal local air quality problem is the way that people arrive at the airport, because most people come by car. And that's true even if one looks at somewhere like Manchester Airport, much bigger airports than Leeds Bradford. Manchester, as you probably know, has a railway station actually underneath the passenger terminal, but it's only used by about 15% of passengers at the moment. So even when it's on site and it's really convenient, people still, for some reason, would prefer to come by motor car. And Leeds Bradford Airport is situated on a hilltop in Yeadon. It's the highest altitude airport in the country. And there is a bus, but it's not a particularly good bus service. It's fairly near a railway line, the Leeds to Harrogate railway line, but not quite near enough. And there was some hope that the railway line could be diverted. That's come to nothing. And the latest suggestion, which the City Council and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, who have responsibility for public transport, is to run a shuttle bus service from a new Parkway station. And so that's the possibilities of that are being explored. Where is the campaign at the moment? Well, Leeds City Council is the planning authority in whose bailiwick the airport sits, and they had 2 meetings which were open to the public. They were Zoom meetings, and so people could sit in and watch. And we were both shocked and saddened to see the poor level of debate, the poor level of understanding by many of the councillors who sat on that committee. And it seemed to us that a lot of the councillors were grounding their support for the airport expansion on matters that we're really not planning decision relevant. So, for example, one councillor said that Leeds now has a Premier League football team and it deserved a Premier League airport. Well, I don't think anyone here thinks that, and you don't have to be a lawyer to know that that's not a valid criterion for making a planning judgment. So, as things stand, the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, for Communities and Housing, who is the cabinet minister responsible for planning, he has put a stop on this at the moment. He could, if he wished, do what is known as calling in the decision. That would mean that he would take the decision, because it's a planning application, he would take the decision out of the hands of the local authority, and he would appoint a planning inspector from the planning inspectorate. There would then be a public inquiry. We have urged him to do this. We think that it's a very complicated decision. There's a lot of local support for the airport because it means jobs, and employment is something that people are extremely concerned about. That's not straightforward. The New Economics Foundation, whom we consulted, produced a report, and that really questioned and queried a number of the assumptions that the owners of the airport were making about the number of new jobs that will be produced by this expansion. So that's not clear. But what is clear is the benefits, the economic benefits of the airport are far from clear, whereas the environmental disbenefits are very quantifiable. So at the moment, the application is in the waiting room. We are waiting for Mr. Jenrick to decide whether to give it to the planning inspectorate to have an inquiry, or simply to allow the application to proceed. As things stand, the City Council have granted the application, but it's in limbo whilst Mr. Jenrick makes up his mind. We think it's likely that the decision won't be taken until later on this year. As people will know, there's the COP26 meeting later in 2021. And for political reasons, we don't think that the government will want to be seen to be permitting airport expansion while that is ongoing or in the run up to it. We hope that we're not being unduly cynical there. And we hope that Mr. Jenrick won't simply wash his hands of this application once COP26 is over. The government also has something called the 6th carbon budget to worry about. There have been 5 previous carbon budgets, but none of them has ever until now taken account of international aviation in adding up the UK's total carbon footprint. For the first time, the government's Climate Change Commission has advised that international aviation emissions ought to be counted. And this, to someone from my background, seems like a no-brainer. It's obvious that international aviation and international shipping, which also at the moment is exempt, ought to be counted, because they make between them a significant contribution to our greenhouse gas emissions. So at the moment, although the global contribution from aviation is only 2% of total emissions, the UK's aviation is 7%. And clearly the reason for that is that there are huge numbers of people in the developing world who never fly at all. Whereas if you simply drew a line around the UK or the United States of America or the European Union, you find that most of the world's aviation emissions are coming from those places, from developed rich countries. And so in the UK, the total aviation emissions are in the order of 7%, not 2%, which is a global figure.
Well, many thanks, Chris. I think you've given us a lot to think about.
Gosh, I haven't noticed that I have gone my 10 minutes, haven't I? I'm so sorry.
But
once
really,
I get started, it's hard
really
to stop.
appreciated that you've had time to come in and talk to us. And I hope you may find some of the other things being talked about will be of interest. And
It's
I think
been
we'll all
fascinating
follow.
so far.
Yeah, I think we'll all be following what happens with the airport with considerable interest. So thanks very much for that. We're now moving on to the Green New Deal in Yorkshire with Jess Solomon Thomas and Mia Thomas. So I'll pass over to two other Medact activists.
Hi everyone. Jess is going to share the slides for us. I'll quickly introduce us. My name's Mia. I'm coordinator of Medact Leeds and a doctor working in Leeds, and Jess is coordinator of Medact Sheffield and a medical student in Sheffield.
And I'm very sorry, but Mia, can you share the slides?
Yeah, let me have a go.
So sorry.
Grand. Let me just try and move this. Sorry, we're both should be good at this at our age, Jess. Very good. Here we go. You present. Great. So we're going to quickly talk about Health for a Green New Deal, and we thought it'd be worth mentioning or talking about this tonight because Medact nationally have just brought out a really amazing report talking about the public health argument for a Green New Deal. So it's this kind of moment that's happening within Medact nationally, but also kind of hopefully medicine nationally, talking about the health argument for a Green New Deal. And we're using this report and the ideas around it to kind of go forward with our local groups. So we thought we'd mention it in this tonight. So Health for a Green New Deal is a kind of it all comes from this report, and this is the kind of précis of this report, and it's aiming to support the health community to work towards a transformative Green New Deal and to support those working in health to organise for a just transition to a zero carbon society. So I think this is the kind of crux of it, a just transition to a zero carbon society. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what Green New Deal is, and then Jess is going to talk about the kind of more health aspects of it. And I think Green New Deal, what actually is it? It's something that I'd heard of in the elections, in our election here and in the US, it got talked about a bit, but I didn't know a huge amount about it. So I'm just going to go through the kind of, I'm not an expert, but I'll go through the kind of general idea of what the Green New Deal is. And it is a 10-year action plan to rapidly cut our emissions by modernising transport, housing and food systems. And I think in this I also read health system, because as obviously Alexis was saying, there's a huge amount of emissions that go on within our health system. So that's kind of where we want to get to, a zero carbon society. But along the way, we need to create millions of secure and well-paid jobs that benefit our communities and cut carbon. So that's talking about making an economy that's based on secure jobs which are green. We need to build thriving public services and expand our health and social care, transport and education systems. So that sounds great to me. And I think these first three are all things that we probably hear politicians talk about quite a lot. And they're all things that are really, really important. But I think it's the last 2 points here that made me feel really excited about the Green New Deal. Number 4 is tackling rampant inequality by investing in our communities that need it the most. And number 5, standing shoulder to shoulder with people around the world fighting for climate justice. And I think putting in their central tenets, these kind of real human tackling inequality and solidarity with people around the world, I think that really focuses and speaks of the just transition. So we know we need to get to a zero carbon society, but we need to get there in a way that doesn't widen already existing inequalities, that doesn't leave behind groups of people that are already more living in more deprived areas and things like that. And I think for me as a doctor, but also just as a human, I think that's really, really important that we kind of build that into our systems. So how will the Green New Deal be implemented? It's a government-led programme guided by these key 5 principles that I just went over. But I think this is really important. It's not a single government policy or law. So we're not saying, let's pass the Green New Deal, we passed it, we won. It will require the passing of many individual laws. And so it's more like a lens that we want to fight for the government to look through all of the laws that they're making and how they're spending their money and how we're building our society. So it's not a single thing, it's a kind of lens through which we can fight for better laws in general. And there are already, just to say, there are already some early day motions and things like that going through, being put to government to try and enshrine some of the things in Green New Deal in law, such as green jobs and things like that. So it is starting to happen slowly. Oh, I can skip one. So it sounds big, but will the public support it? And this is just a kind of a very nice slide talking about the fact that there is public support for these kind of economic and political changes. 80% of people want the government to create jobs to replace those that are lost. I think that's a bit low. That seems like quite obviously they should do that. But 80% also think we're facing a climate emergency, and majority can already see and feel the impacts. And I think that's really high because climate emergency is obviously a really bold statement, and it's really good that lots of people are kind of using that kind of language. And it's obviously much more so than ever before. Climate change is being talked about in the media and things like that. So it is on people's minds, and it's just sort of galvanizing that movement to create political change as well. So that's just a really brief overview on what the Green New Deal is. And I'm just going to talk about the health impacts.
Cool. Thank you, Mia. And thank you to all the speakers that have been very eloquently talking about all these issues. So yeah, why health for a Green New Deal? And I guess that's the reason why we're all here, because, you know, we're concerned about health and we're concerned about the climate. And I'm, you know, I think you've heard from some of the people that have spoke before that your voice now is really important in this movement, and we have a huge part to play in not only thinking about the carbon footprint of the NHS, but also thinking about the wider implications and some of the policies that go with that. So Mia, if you could, sorry, thanks. So this is a slide, and I think some people have already demonstrated, you know, very nicely the impacts that climate change is going to have on health, not just globally, but in the UK as well. And yeah, so there is just some things that's going to lead to: deaths, injuries, infectious diseases, chronic diseases, and mental health problems. I think that, you know, those are just a few things, but they're pretty big things. I think you'll agree. And you know, we're starting to see that. And Matt gave some sort of facts and figures about, you know, about the number of deaths that are going to be caused by, you know, big heat waves, but also those like flash floods and rising sea levels as well. So, you know, we are seeing already the impacts that climate and ecological crisis is having on health. Thanks, Mia. Oh. But also just to say that the reason, you know, not only is it just because that we get to see the frontline effects of climate change on health, but it's also because our voice is very trusted as well. And I think we need to recognise that we are in a very privileged position to be one of the most, you know, in one of the most trusted professions. And actually, I think that when health professionals do put their voice to a movement, it can be really influential, and, you know, for good or for bad. But I think, you know, we want to use our voices for good. And so that's why we really encourage you to get involved. So here's a little timeline of where we're up to with the current Health for a Green New Deal campaign. So a couple of months ago, it feels like a really long time now, Health for a Green New Deal was born, which took a lot of planning and some very hard work from some very wonderful people. And then, as Mia talked about earlier, the public health case for a Green New Deal was published, and we had some really interesting talks to welcome that. So that talks about, you know, as Mia explained, some of the plans that we have going forward and some of the policies that we would be encouraging politicians to support, and some of the ideas that we're campaigning on and working around. So one of the first things that we've been doing is getting, and I think this has gone hand in hand with, you know, because I'm sure you're aware of the global pandemic we're in, and the mass unemployment that we're now seeing. We realise that there's a massive need for that recovery, and in that is going to be, you know, the need to create lots of jobs. And as part of that just transition, we want to be creating green jobs, sustainable jobs, jobs that, you know, people aren't going to have to leave in a couple of years' time because there's going to be they're in heavy industries that are sort of sort of based in extractivist sort of mindsets. So we did a lobbying our MPs action for green jobs, so getting them to support an early day motion, which is currently sitting in Parliament. I don't know if that's the correct terms, but we'll go with that, which is now, so we did some online videos, and there's been a couple of meetings with MPs around the UK, and now 42 MPs have signed the early day motion on green jobs, which is pretty massive, but we want more MPs to sign it, and that's where you come in, I suppose. So we have a very lovely supportive group, but we are, we'd really like more people to join the team and to start lobbying their MPs to support this early day motion, which is calling for more green jobs as part of the COVID recovery. And so, yeah, if you do the next slide, Mia, I think. So some of the actions that you can take are joining the local Medact groups and getting involved with the Health for a Green New Deal, where there is a lot of support in how you can lobby your MPs and how you can get involved. And I personally definitely recommend reading this lovely document called the Public Health Case for a Green New Deal, which has had a lot of work put into it, but some really, really interesting stuff. And yeah, would definitely recommend it. So yeah, thanks very much for listening.
And just to say, after this meeting, there'll be an email sent out, and as part of that, there's a template of a letter that you can write to your MP to ask them to sign this early day motion.
Well, many thanks, Jess, and many thanks, Mia. I think we're going to be hearing from you again in a few moments. But you're, I think, essentially saying let your informed voice be heard. So great things to keep working on. I think we're now privileged to have one of York City of York's councillors, Christian Vassi, and I think we're really pleased that you could join us. So can I hand over to you, and in this relatively short time we have, if you can tell us where you're at and what you want everything to do and what's happening in York. Not a small
Thank
job.
you. Thank you. I hope I'm unmuted. Yes, it's been inspiring and uplifting listening to you all. And I'll start by saying I'm one of Matt's middle-aged white men councillors. So let's get that out of the way. I was thinking about what I was going to say. I thought there's a joke that really sums up my thoughts on this whole issue. And it's about a person who's addressing a crowd on all the environmental challenges facing us. She demands action on climate change to save forests, deliver green jobs, clean up the water, save wildlife, bring energy into independence, improve children's health, reduce air pollution, cut energy bills, improve well-being. And a restless member of the crowd shouts back, yeah, but what if climate change is a hoax, and we waste all that money making the world a better place for nothing? And indeed, that to me is one of the cores of all of this, because what I want to talk to you about today is communication. The presentations I've heard have all been absolutely fantastic, and I've learned all sorts of stuff. And I know that most of the time people are not hearing this stuff. I spent a couple of seconds thinking about giving you a boast list about all the good things that City of York Council's doing. The biggest electric fleet in the country, electric bus fleet in the country, new hyperhub charging points for electric vehicles, new community woodlands and pollinator strategies, a developing zero carbon pathway, cycle routes, action on pension funds to try and get the pension fund to invest in green infrastructure. Then I thought, stop. I don't think I should do that. That's a waste of time. Oh, I've done it. I'm sorry. Then I thought, oh, if I do that, I'll have to share all my frustrations at all the lack of progress in the council on all the other stuff where we're failing. For example, we've not agreed a local plan for 60 years. I mean, how stupid is that? But I want to be constructive, so let's move on. I really want to talk to you about communication. I know that we could talk about improving habitats for biodiversity in hospital grounds, and I could respond to all the amazing things that Alexis and others have told us. But I want to focus on communication. We're all under stress. Mental health problems linked to anxiety about climate change is a rapidly growing issue. We still have much to do to prevent runaway climate change. When I was 20, we all had our own anxieties, nuclear weapons, the ozone hole. Each generation has its worries. But the transformed communications of the 21st century amplifies those worries and that each generation has to bear. And we're at a critical moment where we're in the echo chamber of fake news, of people hearing news and opinions only from people and sources they already agree with. Truth and news have become vehicles for advertising products. Quizzes on social media are actually devices for harvesting personal data in order to sell us more stuff, products, politics, prejudices. If you believe in a flat earth, or that lunatic idea that Jewish lasers in space are setting off forest fires, or the idea that renewable technologies don't work, or any of the other conspiracies festering in the wacky world of social media, then there's a whole world of nuttiness waiting to embrace you with open arms. It's in that context that communication is so important. We need to engage intelligently and ensure that our efforts to tackle climate change are heard widely and understood. The first thing I did when asked to speak to you was to open Google Maps and look at the roof of the hospital in York. I couldn't see a single solar panel. Malton Community Hospital and Scarborough Hospital, same thing. I did see huge numbers of air conditioning units. So then I thought to myself, well, is the NHS doing nothing to tackle the energy transition? Well, as we've heard from Alexis, nothing can be further from the truth. But how many people know what we're doing? As I searched, I found all sorts of projects that showed these issues are being taken seriously. I saw that York Hospital commissioned in 2015 a new combined heat and power system. I saw that Scarborough Hospital has opened a refurbished new low carbon energy centre in 2017. And of course, in 2 days' time, it's your NHS Sustainability Day. But what are we doing to promote the energy transition and all this action to the widest public, including the middle-aged white men councillors like me? I'd never heard of these initiatives until I started searching. Why isn't the NHS promoting these actions and commitments more powerfully to patients, staff and the local population through exhibitions in the entrances of hospitals and clinics and health centres, through partnership working with local authorities, using the real estate to communicate? Why isn't the public learning of the savings that are being made through climate change action? I understand that one of the projects I was looking at, I can't remember whether it was the Scarborough or the York project, was going to be saving £500,000 a year that could be spent on patient services and care. Surely that needs to be understood. I say this because right now we all need hope and inspiration. We need to have confidence that we can and are rising to the climate change challenge together. Communication is so important to this. And I say this as a councillor in a large administration where councils are pretty rubbish at communicating. I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here. I think we're all too busy firefighting and dealing with the challenges of today and not actually communicating the good work we're doing. Look at the money thrown at persuading us that buying this or that utterly unremarkable car doesn't just plonk us in a traffic jam on our commute to work, but magically wags its rear wiper like a playful puppy, then transports us to an achingly beautiful landscape beneath clear blue skies with mountains thick with flowers and frolicking lambs, while we speed along deliciously winding roads mysteriously empty of any traffic. Business understands how to sell stuff. We need to get smarter. I think we need to get over what I see in local authorities as a real blockage where too often we think that communication is a waste of money. It's a distraction, that the money should be spent on providing services and not on telling people what we're doing, not on lifting people up. And so we limp on with an anxious, partially engaged public, increasingly fearful that nothing is being done or can be done, that it's too late, that we might as well ignore the problem and flood the world with as much plastic, carbon dioxide and pesticides as we can stuff in our faces. The York Hospital CHP project apparently is expected to deliver energy cost savings of £2.7 million and 47,000 tonnes of CO2, will be saved during its 15-year lifespan. Can we have that shouted from the rooftops? After all, there are no solar panels blocking us getting on the rooftops, so we can engage with that and make sure that we're heard. I understand that the investment of 4.6 million would generate a 25% reduction in energy bills. Has it happened? Can we talk about it? So my thought for the day for you is, can we make sure that everything that is being done is widely promoted, not just among ourselves, but as in the widest way to inspire and engender confidence in the wider public, in local authorities, in staff, in politicians, in national government. Let's make sure that everyone knows the practical benefits of saving the world. Yes, it is worth doing. Here are a couple of good news stories I'm just going to throw in to make you smile, because I've just read them and they were uplifting. Last year, the UK had 5,147 coal-free hours of electricity generation, according to the National Grid. That's the equivalent to 212 days without coal. And Christmas Day 2020 was the first coal-free electricity generation Christmas since the UK started producing electricity. All of this matters. I want to just redirect the rocket thrust of JFK's famous speech to launch the US space program to you and rephrase it. We choose to tackle climate change. We choose to tackle climate change in this decade and do the other thing, not because it is easy, but because it is hard, because that goal will serve to organize the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. Don't misunderstand me. The City Council is not doing great things. It's not better than anyone else, but we can move. And lastly, the reason why we all need to be involved is critical. I'm part of a plan to create a zero carbon pathway for York. Initially, we said we'll create a zero carbon York by 2030. Then the more we looked into it, the more we realized it's not in our gift. The City Council can, if it wants, retrofit 7,500 council homes and make them to passive house standards. But if all the inhabitants of those homes spend the £1,000 a year saving on more shopping and going on foreign flights, we won't have reduced carbon emissions at all. So that is why, for me, communication is at the heart of all of this. Let's work together, the health trusts, the local authorities, to really ensure that every saving we do, every project that Alexis is able to deliver is talked about and understood to inspire us all and to lift us all up. Making the world a better place is not for nothing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Christian. I think you've given us an excellent lesson in communication. So thanks for that. And I think we'll be very interested to follow what's happening in York. So thanks, very inspiring. Hope we can keep going. And now I'll pass over to another Medact colleague, Angela, who is ready to tell us about Medact Yorkshire. What's Medact Yorkshire all about?
Hi, thank you. And I've got to follow Christian now. That's a challenge. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so Medact's aim is for a safer, fairer and better world. And I'm sure we've all woken up in the morning at some point and thought, I really need to do something about it. Sometimes just making the first move is the hardest bit, particularly if you feel like you're on your own. Yorkshire is big and beautiful, but it's got lots of areas with not many people in. Leeds and Sheffield groups will be sharing their thoughts about that in a little while. For those of us living in more rural areas, it's easy to feel a bit isolated. So it's good to feel the support and encouragement from Medact Yorkshire Group for our local campaigns. Medact Yorkshire was formed in 2017 after a couple of Yorkshire-based members met at a Medact conference down in London. Our current campaigns are focusing on local government pension scheme divestment And these have been instrumental in the formation of fossil-free groups for North and East Yorkshire. But we have also been looking into sustainability in healthcare, and a member produced a wonderful report of sustainability plans of the Yorkshire Hospital Trust. And we've learnt from members about universal basic income and the Menwith Hill accountability campaign at the US intelligence base near Harrogate. In normal times, we've met as a group in York and Leeds, but we do like to get out and about a bit. And we've supported local campaigners at the Shell gas sites in Kirby Misperton in North Yorkshire, and also at the West Newton site in East Yorkshire. But as you can see from these photos, it always seems to be freezing cold when we go on fracking protests. But we did manage to pick a lovely sunny day to join with the school strikes. And we also keep an eye on the national Medact campaigns and help out when we can. Okay, we've had online meetings out of necessity in the past year. But they've been really useful because of the geography of Yorkshire being so big. I'm sure we'll carry on with them. But there's nothing quite like meeting up in the flesh with like-minded people to get energised and enthused, share ideas and formulate plans. And to be perfectly honest, I'm missing the tea and cake. So I hope we'll see you all in person soon. And you can contact us by these ways. We'll pop all this in the email and I'll put it in the chat as well. Okay, thank you, Martin.
Well, thanks very much, Angela. I hope you've given people some idea of the diversity of activities that Yorkshire Medact is into. But we'll now move back to Jess to tell us about Medact in Sheffield.
Thank you very much. Oh, tea and cake sounds lovely, Angela. Right, so I will try and share my screen again. Let's see if this one works. Can you see that all right? Lovely. So I'll just very quickly talk about Sheffield Medact. So my name is Jess, I'm a medical student here in Sheffield. And something we've been working on recently. So we've been a bit more sort of health access focused, and we've been working on a campaign called Patients Not with a campaign called Patients Not Passports. So that is a sort of coalition of another group called Migrants Organise and Docs Not Cops as well. So we've been working with them, and they do lots of campaigning around the hostile environment in the NHS, and how how different people can access the health service in different ways. And I think, although it isn't, I know you've come here to listen to environmental things, but I think we have to be so aware that with the increasing migration that we are going to be seeing, we need to be a hospitable country for people to come and live in, and that, and I think the NHS is gonna be sort of on the front line of dealing with some of those things. And so we've been sort of over the last couple of months campaigning with local people around their access to healthcare, and some of the issues that they've faced. So Justice for Simba was a campaign that was run in Sheffield, and that was about an individual who had very difficult, debilitating condition due to a lack of access to healthcare, which could have easily been prevented. So we were sort of standing in solidarity with him and his family. And more recently, we've been working on the Vaccines for All campaign, as I think it's been a bit, vaccine uptake has been quite a difficult thing around the UK for marginalised communities, and people have been worried about accessing healthcare because of because there is migrant charging in the NHS that still goes on, and people are sometimes scared to access healthcare because of there's data sharing with the Home Office as well. We've also been sort of putting on educational sessions around health justice and access to healthcare. And yeah, so that's the work we've been doing. But we are also maybe you can we are also sort of now collaborating with South Yorkshire Green New Deal, and this is one of our lovely members, Anna, who was at an event about green jobs, as we talked about green jobs earlier, that's something that we're really sort of trying to campaign towards in Sheffield Medact as well, and we'll be looking to do more of that. So that's Anna saying that let's recruit and train nurses, care workers and therapists as part of a national green job scheme. And I think often when we think of green jobs, we think of people in hard hats and making wind turbines, but actually thinking of care as green jobs and how we invest in that as well. So where are we headed next is the question. So we've got a big planning meeting coming up. So if any of you are Sheffield based, we'd really love to hear your voices and where you'd like to see our campaigns going. And we've got an access to healthcare webinar coming up and talking again about the hostile environment in the NHS. And we'll continue working with justice focused organisations in Sheffield, and we'll be looking to do more campaigning and lobbying of MPs for Health for a Green New Deal. So if any of those tickle your fancy, or you've got other ideas that that you'd like to get going with and you're Sheffield based, please do get in touch. We'll be sending out the contact details in the email as well. So yeah, we'd love to see you soon, and maybe we can do tea and cake as well. That would be nice.
Right. Thank you, Jess. That gives people plenty of other ideas what to do if you're in the Sheffield area. And now we're passing back to Mia Thomas, who's going to tell us what to do in Leeds.
Hi. Yeah, so Leeds Medact, this is quite a brief presentation because we're quite a new little group. Oh, how do I view it? Yeah, very good. Oh dear, sorry guys. Hey. So Leeds Medact, yeah, so we're one of the newest Medact groups. I think we started autumn winter last year, so we've just kind of been growing in our numbers, and it's all obviously been on Zoom so far. So I really hope soon we're going to have an in-person meeting, and that'll be really nice to finally meet each other properly. We have focused so far on the expansion of the airport, and so we've heard all about that from the wonderful presentation by Galba, and their wonderful work has largely led what we've been up to. We wrote a letter from people, health and social care professionals in Yorkshire, arguing the health case for not expanding the airport, and we've sent that off to Robert Jenrick, who actually hasn't got back to us yet, but you know, maybe he will. And yeah, so we'll our work so far has been about the airport expansion, and we will carry on advocating against the expansion, and use the kind of Green New Deal stuff to focus where we're going. But we are really new, so at the minute we're just sort of at the stage of mobilising local people and getting to know each other and building a community. So if you're Leeds based and want to get involved, 19th of June, we're going to have an online community building evening where we talk about who we are and where we're going, and make some concrete plans. Then after the 19th of June, in July, hopefully we're going to have an in-person meeting. So yeah, please do get involved. We are very new, and on the lookout for more people and more friends. That's it. I told you it was going to be short.
Thank you, Mia. That's good, and I think that's a very good point at which we can now move over to questions that people have asked. And I think I'm passing over to Reinhard to take us through some of the questions and see if we can answer those, or point to the people who raised the relevant parts. Reinhard.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think there is one, very, at least in my opinion, important question about hydrogen technology. And I don't know who would like to respond to this tricky issue, because there's green hydrogen and gray hydrogen, and there's a lot of discussion. Matt raises his hand and Alex is nods. So maybe you both want to say something about it. Thank you.
I was just going to say it very much depends on what you're wanting a fuel to do as to what the best sort of fuel is. Hydrogen has undoubtedly got its place. However, I think one of the controversial issues is how you make it, and whether you take methane, for example, and natural gas, i.e. a fossil fuel, and try and break it down into hydrogen, releasing carbon dioxide in the as you do that. And so I think a lot depends on what you actually want the fuel to do. So I would personally take a step back and say, what are we trying to achieve with this energy source, and is hydrogen going to be the right one? The other is that if you go onto the BP website or any of the fossil fuel websites and ask them how long the fossil fuels have left, what is the world's known resources supplies of oil or gas, it's somewhere between 40 and 80 years. So by the end of this century, we're going to have something different, because we're not going to have any more gas to or oil to be able to turn into hydrogen anyway. So even if it was a solution, it's not going to be a long-term solution.
Alexis, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd kind of echo what Matt's saying, but there is a place for green hydrogen. I don't think there's a place for brown or grey hydrogen at all, which basically brown is generated from caustic soda. Like there are things that hydrogen is generated from as a byproduct, but for grey hydrogen, which is cracked from methane, we need to be phasing that out altogether. But in reality, we already generate a lot of methane that we're never going to be able to escape. So sewage works across the country generate it. But for fleets, especially as an ambulance service, it's something that is quite, it may be the only option for range, and especially for HGVs to decarbonise. But the reality is you need to have 99.9% pure hydrogen to have that. So the greener hydrogen that you can have and generate, and there's a lot of ways that you can generate hydrogen without it breaking down things like methane. If you're, at the moment we switch off wind turbines offshore because we're generating too much electricity, and the only way to store that electricity, because it needs to be used at the point of use, point of generation. So the only way to store it is to convert it into something else, and hydrogen is one of those things. But you do end up with a 20% loss of energy. So there's pros and cons for it. But within Leeds and across the whole of Yorkshire, we are set to become one of the first hydrogen counties in the world with the H21 Citygate project. So there may be a lot of potential for hydrogen going forwards, because it will be one of the very few options for decarbonising heat, and especially in large healthcare facilities. We need to consider it.
Okay, thank you both.
Reinhard, just to say, Christian's got his hand up. I think he wanted to add something.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
If I can just add that the City Council, I've been part of the group with the City Council talking with the Local Enterprise Partnership, which represents a whole variety of interests across the region, talking exactly as Alexis has said about green hydrogen and whether we could use offshore wind, because you may know that Yorkshire and North Yorkshire and York have made the commitment to become, or are wanting to make a commitment to become, the country's first carbon negative region. And there's no way that kind of ambition can ever be achieved unless we get very serious. So what Alexis has just said tallies very much with the kind of discussions that are happening at the Local Enterprise Partnership.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good. Very interesting developments. I like to live in a carbon negative region, so that's really encouraging. Now, Chris Wright, you asked some questions about supply chain and waste strategy. Do you want to ask it yourself, or shall I read it out? So he asked, I think it's he, asked the question, can the NHS supply chain target supplies to use biodegradable cellulose packaging? And also, will the ICS be able to combine to provide an effective waste strategy to support the providers' waste to energy recycling managed biodegrading? So are there any takers for these questions? Or do you, Chris, are you still there?
I think Alexis is indicating that she's happy to take that
Okay.
one.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds it's questions for Alexis. Yes, please.
So, I mean, I might echo what Christian might come in and say, that there are some real challenges with biodegradable products and looking at plastics. Most biodegradable things come from something that is a natural product. So essentially, if you're looking at corn manufacturing or something like that, it could be a byproduct waste, or it could be corn that is used as a biodegradable packaging. So essentially, you're taking food that could be is a water intensive aspect to be used as packaging as a single use and thrown in the bin. We have a real challenge in the healthcare sector because a lot of our packaging could be classified, and it doesn't necessarily have to be classified as contaminated. So essentially you can create a biodegradable waste or you can create a plastic waste and it will still get incinerated. So we need to start looking at packaging and saying, do we actually need the packaging? It's a much more productive way of looking at it rather than saying, yeah, can we come up with alternatives that are more biodegradable? The other challenges that we have within the UK is we only have about 6 or 7 facilities, that may have changed now, that can actually process biodegradable waste. And taking it out of the waste stream can actually end up contaminating a lot of the waste if you've got biodegradable in with recyclable or non-recyclable. So there are a lot of challenges that go with waste. And on the ICS waste strategy, it will be something that will be mandated, I think, probably in this next year or so to look at that. And we need to look at what we do for part of the incineration process. And realistically, do we need to be incinerating what is basically a product that could be reused somewhere or reprocessed into something else? We need to look very differently at what we're generating as a waste. And I think Margaret's nodding vigorously. And I think probably from our kind of project with looking at face masks, you can actually see the amount that we've produced, which is over 1.9 billion face masks in the past year that have all gone in the bin. Essentially, those are a single-use plastic product that could be reused somewhere else. And there are trusts around the UK that are looking at that. So it's a waste that it's also got an asset at the end of the life. But if we look at different ways of processing things, we can actually eliminate waste altogether. And that's what we need to in a net zero NHS or a net zero society, essentially.
Thank you, Alexis. I think Maria Foltz, you had, is that a question linked to this waste problem? But I don't quite understand it. Can you explain it yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a GP in Bradford, and I know there's quite a lot of resources for GPs and prescribers to start trying reducing our carbon level at a practice level, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of kind of incentives for that, and there's not a lot of leadership. Well, and there is a lot of leadership, but it's not filtering through in a kind of systematic way. It's kind of up to local champions, which is fine, but it needs more to engage people. And I just wondered, Alexis and Matt, I wondered particularly if you knew how that might move forward or what's happening along those lines.
Yes, I'd be delighted to talk to you for days about the barriers and the hurdles for system change. Absolutely. I mean, I think that you're right. At ground level, there are more and more resources for clinicians like you or I, and things that we can do within our practice of the non-carbon emissions footprint. I had a conversation today with NHS England about how to get this more incentivized so that there's a sort of a top-down, systematic, system-wide change, whether it be on energy use, building fabric, waste management, etc., sort of, across the board. And it's I go to meetings on a daily basis and sort of put the plug for frontline clinicians, frontline GPs, and saying, we want to do things. We've got patients in front of us who are suffering and struggling because of the climate crisis and heat or flooding or whatever it is. We just need a few extra tools to be able to make this happen. We need to be able to make it happen, not just in isolation, but with the local authority, with the local ambulance trust, with the local police service, with education. We know that we can't solve this as individuals or even as an individual sector, and it is trying to get all of those cross links to actually make it happen. I can talk to you offline if you want about some of the things. For example, hospital trusts have got estates managers, facilities managers, energy managers, people who are trained to be able to help their premises reduce their energy loss. We don't really have that in primary care. So actually, I would like some help from secondary care, or some of the specialists in secondary care, to understand primary care and not have the sustainable travel officer go, right, you just need to green your fleet. Well, in primary care, that's nonsense. We don't have a fleet to green. So it's having people with the expertise understanding the uniqueness of primary care and actually assisting us to be able to reduce our overall environmental impact, not just carbon, but across the board. So yes, we're on it, but it's a long, slow process. So the more people who can, put those letters in, who can support those who are trying to do it, absolutely, there is strength in our voices.
Thank you, Matt. Christian, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just to respond to the questions about packaging. You may all know this, you may not, so I thought maybe I should show you this. Among other hats I wear, I've been a product designer, but I wanted to just show you these plastic bags, because these plastic bags are made from cassava. And if you put them in water, they hold their own for 2 or 3 weeks until they start developing mold. If you put them in hot water, they dissolve in about 10 seconds. And I think there are lots of things that we need to be thinking about in terms of packaging. I'm not going to pretend to have any expertise about your area of work, but in my area of work, we had, for example, big discussions about shipping thousands of products where each product was in its own individual shrunk wrap plastic sachet. And you'd have thousands and thousands of little plastic bags. And the explanation for that was, we want to protect it from water ingress. We want to make sure that it's sterile. We want to make sure it's safe. And we moved from that in the particular company where I was a design manager. We moved from that system to getting rid of all those little plastic bags and putting 1,000 products in one large plastic bag that accomplished all those requirements of protecting the goods in transit without having thousands of little bags. I've no idea whether that's applicable and who it's applicable to in the NHS, but I do know that there are solutions to so many of these challenges if we engage with the opportunities that exist.
You're muted, Reinhardt.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more.
Thank you, Christian. That was very helpful. I pass on to Margaret, because I think we have reached the end, or we have actually overdrawn. So normally in the cinema, the film would have ended by now, but and some people look a bit tired, so probably should close here, unless there are some burning questions or comments.
Alexis, I had a hand up.
Just one last comment. There's so NHS Property has up to £5 million that will be available from each property sale. And what we're looking to do as part of the ITS across the region is to target GPs and other things to ensure that sustainability is at the core of any kind of improvements that go on. So if a building is sold, it will be reinvested back into the local healthcare system. So Maria, there's something on the cards that potentially could spread across the whole of the UK on that. But also there's something to say that it was the head of the WHO basically stated the risks posed by climate change could dwarf that of any single disease. The pandemic will end, but there will be no vaccine for climate change. We have to act now. And I think we all have our place to play in this one. So I think everybody should take it go away and look at what they're doing as part of this, because we all, from somebody cleaning the floors to a chief executive, we can all influence everything that happens within our system.
Thank you. These were very good words at the end, very important message.
And Reinhardt, Marjorie has her hand up. I think quite keen to say something.
Marjorie, please go ahead.
It's just to make you aware that I attended a really good Zoom meeting over in the States. It's the Medical Societies for Climate Change, for Climate Health, Medical Societies for Climate Health. It was amazing the work that's been done. And also floridaclinicians.org. They've been looking at extreme heat with farm workers that are working long hours in 0-hour contracts, having to work long hours in extreme heat. So floridaclinicians.org, Medical Societies for Climate Health, and medical societies meet second Friday in every month. And I think Martin had enjoyed the meetings.
Thank you, Marjorie. That is very helpful. So